Yes, hello. Okay, so I want this to be interactive, but it's going to be a little bit difficult because we're recording, so just FYI. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions throughout or have anything to add to what I share, okay? Thank you all for joining and being in Prague with us. My name is MaryAnn Emerick, and I work at the HDSA, which is the Huntington's Disease Society of America. I'm the manager of youth and community services there, but I also have worked at a long-term care facility as a social worker for about 5 years there prior to being at HDSA. I also come from an HD family. My mom passed away about 15 years ago from Huntington's disease, so I will intertwine the impacts on myself and being a young caregiver along with the presentation, all right? Are we all set to start? Cool. Okay. We love you, Mary. All right, maybe if I... Okay, so we're going to talk about what it is to be a young caregiver, what does a young caregiver look like when you're impacted by HD, because that's a little bit different, right? How does it and how can it impact you in the future? Caregiver burnout and finding support. So a caregiver is a person who's taken on responsibility to care for somebody that can't care for themselves. But that looks really different for a lot of different people. And it's not necessarily, full-time care 24/7, right? And in the HD space, it looks even more different. So we're gonna dive into that a little bit. So I did a little bit of research just like on a worldwide scale, not just US based, but over 35% of caregivers are under the age of 25. And 1 in 4 caregivers are between the ages of 26 and 44 years old. And the only research and a lot of support that's being provided right now, not in the US, but in some countries in Europe, but a lot of focus has recently come out after the pandemic. So if one good thing came out is a lot of focus on young people having to be caregivers for, their parents or siblings or grandparents or other people in their family or close friends. So there is a lot more research going on now currently, but hopefully more in the future so we could provide more support on a national level and local level. So the different sides of caregiving. So like I said before, caregiving looks different and impacts different people in different ways. So it's not just the, I care for my parent on a physical level, like I bathe them, I dress them. There's so much more to caregiving than that. Sometimes it's just, making sure mom or dad or a sibling is safe in the home, right? Because things could just change so randomly. It's managing medications, it's managing appointments, doctor's appointments, it's providing that financial support sometimes, right? It's also just cleaning, doing housework, doing laundry, cooking, feeding your loved one. And there's also just that companionship and psychosocial, being that support person for your loved one that you're caregiving for, but also for the people around, right? So if you're caregiving or helping caregive for a parent or a sibling, there's other people in the house, there's other people in the family or other people in your, chosen family, right, that help support you, and it's supporting them as well. And vice versa, right? We're all supporting each other. And a lot of times it is being that person to translate and communicate different things for your loved one, but for in outside care as well. So how does caregive impact a young person? So it's challenging, right? It's also very demanding on a young person, and it can be rewarding as well, being a caregiver. It's a lot of stress on your mental health, right? It impacts significantly, especially with so many different life changes and life challenges as being a teenager or being even younger than a teenager or a young adult, going through being impacted by HD and then having to care for someone is really difficult. It's difficult outside of HD, right? So when you are impacted, when you are caregiving for your loved one, it makes it that much more difficult. And it's hard to receive support if you're actually providing support for someone else as well. People that are in school, their education's impacted, right? So you might not be able to put as much time into education. If you're thinking about going away for school, that impacts it, right? So the decision making of going away versus staying home, or what you want to do in the future. And then in addition to that, it's, what do you want to do because I could be impacted by HD, right? And then those questions come into play. And it's sort of a lot of layers to making different decisions when you're impacted. There's a lot of financial planning that happens while you're a caregiver, whether that's insurance stuff for medication or medical care, in-home care if you're going to be able to provide that. But it's a lot of financial planning that young people don't normally should be doing, right? And I say normal because our normal is being impacted by HD, right? So it's hard when I'm always like contradicting myself because it's like, validating that this isn't normal. This isn't okay and it's valid to be frustrated at this, but it's also like our normal. So there's not necessarily a choice when you're a young caregiver. When you have to caregive for your loved one, there's usually, you don't have a choice of, hey, do you want to be a caregiver or not? It's usually the only option you have. There's a lot of isolation, a lot of, like I said before, with education, but career development and figuring out what you want to do, because you also have to put into perspective that like you might be caregiving or needing more care. Your loved one might be needing more care in the future. So that comes into play. And you could, when we talk to professionals outside of the HD space, it's difficult because they're just like, well, just get in-home care or put them in a long-term care facility. And that's not always an option, right? It's usually not an option. I know in the US, there's not many HD-specific units, right? And even we might have a lot of long-term care facilities or nursing homes, but they usually don't take people with HD. It's also, I don't want to put my loved one in a long-term care facility. I want to be able to take care of my loved one. I remember, so my mom was placed in a nursing home when I was 11 years old. And it was a forced decision because it was just me and my younger sister. And my mom was showing symptoms my whole life, but I didn't know it, right? And that was a forced decision because she couldn't take care of her kids anymore, right? So we had to be, and she was a single mother, so we had to be placed with other family members. But that wasn't my choice. I thought when she tested positive, I was like, I'm gonna take care of her and my sister for the rest of my life. And that wasn't the case, right? Well, I did. I just thought I was going to be physically taking care of her. And I think we think of caregiving as that physical more than anything else, but it is so much more than that. Even if your loved one is placed, even if you do have other support in the family that is caregiving for your loved one, you are still a caregiver, right? Whether that's providing support for a parent or another sibling or another loved one that is that primary caregiver, you are still a caregiver. If your loved one's placed in a nursing home, you are still a caregiver. Home people would come to me like, why does this still hurt? Why do I still feel like I'm not a caregiver anymore? And it's like, yes, you are, right? You are still providing that like support for them, support for yourself, support for each other, that medical, you're that medical liaison for your loved one, you're that communicator, you're so many things for your loved one. Just because it doesn't look like that normal caregiving aspect doesn't mean you're not a caregiver and doesn't mean you're not impacted by this. So like I said, caregiving looks different within HD families. It usually begins before we realize, right? You're usually, maybe picking up cooking dinner for, your family, or putting together your mom's medication, right? Or doing things like that, scheduling appointments, maybe even helping with your siblings' homework, right? Like doing that role reversal is really, really huge in our HD families, right? So a lot of times you become the parent for siblings, and you're taking care of your loved one. And there's a lot of emotions behind that, right? When you're in this space, and then thereafter, right? And we'll get into like future impacts. But in that moment, there's a lot of maybe anger or frustration, but you have to just do it. And you're not really like diving into those emotions because maybe you don't have that support outside of it. You're missing out of having that like normal childhood or that normal decision-making process in your life, right? So you might not be able to really connect with friends because they don't understand what's going on. And I'm just going to skip because these are a lot of things that are happening while you're being impacted, right? And why you're thinking, like, why am I so different? Why is it my family, not someone else's? I feel so alone. No one understands what I'm going through. How can, I ask for support from my parent when they're going through so much, right? And same thing with siblings. A lot of times you see a sibling being more of that, leader or caregiver, putting on that like parent hat. I remember my sister's only a year and a half younger, but anybody that talks to me and I talk about her, you would think she's still 3 years old because I treat her as though she's a child still because I had to put on that motherly hat like super early and I didn't even realize it. And, we didn't always have a great relationship, but HD definitely kept us like having that strong relationship and building that relationship as we became adults. But it did feel very isolating, right? When you're a young caregiver, you feel alone, you feel like no one at school, no one, none of your friends understand what's going on. They're not making these decisions that I have to make. No one's, changing their mom when they go home, right? But I am. Why is that? So it is very isolating. And it's scary, right? Because you're watching your loved one progress with this disease that there is no cure and no effective treatment, right? And it's thinking about, what's going on in research. Then it's also you're that person that's trying to find care and trying to find what could potentially help my loved one, or realizing that like it might not be able to help my loved one. And that's a lot of emotions in itself, right? And that's a lot of grief. So normal decisions are becoming harder, right? Because you are a caregiver, or you are impacted by HD, and you're maybe trying to make that decision of whether or not to test, or deciding not to test, and figuring out how do you future plan for that, right? So there's a lot of normal decisions that have an extra few layers to them, right? And that includes, I'm not going to read off the list, but whether that's financial planning, future planning, family planning, where you're going to go to school, if you're going to stay home, or do you have to stay home, and what that looks like. So I'm going to prompt a question. What are other ways that being a young caregiver has impacted you or has impacted somebody in your family or that you've seen? Yeah. I'm going to ask you to speak to the mic.
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think it's sometimes difficult to know if I made the right decisions because I was so young, and navigating these things for the first time the best way I could.
I feel like I lost not only one parent, but both my parents.
First, when you're a caregiver for somebody that's sick, a lot of times the focus is just on them. So when you have something like that normal, like, oh my God, I'm dating someone, right? And I just want to talk to my mom. And it's that other parent is just solely focused on whether it's another parent or a sibling. You lose that relationship, you lose that guidance sometimes, right? And that's another part of this that is really challenging. Thank you.
Yeah, to expound on that, actually, it's really isolating because as a child, I don't think people will even recognize most of the time that you're doing so much of the work. In my family, that impacted my relationship with my dad, and I loved my parents very much, but eventually it made it hard to connect with them in any way other than caregiving.
It becomes like the only thing you talk about, right?
I was going to say something that was really difficult was, like, I remember the first time someone told me I was a young caregiver, and I'm like, no, I was just tying my mom's shoes when I was 8 years old, like, no big deal, right? And I think we all get that. What's been hard is like learning about that and realizing like that period of time in my life, and like in my 20s being like, okay, like reflecting on that, coping with it. But then becoming a new type of young caregiver. So I'm a caregiver for my oldest half brother, and he's 17 years older than me. He was my mom's legal guardian. And so I almost miss being young enough to like not know what was happening behind the curtain. Like I didn't have to, I had to file my brother's bankruptcy. I had to get rid of his car. I had to file POA documents. We got to take him to all of his appointments. We have to make sure he's getting dinner. Like all these things that like as a kid, that was all happening behind the scenes. I didn't know what medications my mom was on. I didn't know any of that. So that's been like an interesting dynamic to like relearn like what does it mean to be a caregiver, and it just means different things at different points in time.
So I've always been told that I come across as really mature, like since I was young. And for a long time, I thought that was a good thing, like that it sounded like a positive thing. But I think the reality is it's that I missed out on a lot of my youth because of my dad and was at home with just him and my mom when he was at his worst. So my other siblings got to go off and be in college, and I feel like they had got more of their youth, whereas I was just kind of in the fire of everything.
I was just going to add really quick, realizing that I feel like I was just delayed growing up. Like my mom went into nursing home when I was 11. And then when I had to move in with my dad and stepmom, when I was 12, 13, 14, all the kids in the neighborhood that were at my age, I hung out with their younger siblings. And that was something I didn't really think about until I was in my 20s. And I'm all my friends were 2 to 3 years younger than me. And I think it was me trying to grasp at that being a kid again. And I felt even though I was more mature and more, I felt like I didn't fit in with the kids my age.
Everybody's like, you're so good with kids. I'm like, it's because I never was one, right? Or I always say I've came out of the womb a caregiver, and it's no, I had to be a caregiver, right? I didn't have that choice.
For me and my dad, when he first started showing symptoms and had to give up a lot of his freedoms, there was definitely a power struggle. I was the youngest, and so anytime he would he became super strict because I was the only person he kind of had power over still. So he treated me and my siblings just radically different. I feel and just trying to gain power over your parent at 8 or 9 is just such a weird concept to tell them Dad, sorry, your judgment's kind of flawed right now. And I know it's weird, your kid telling you that and your kid trying to have a parent you, but I kind of have to. Yeah.
And I'm sure maybe Dad was like, you're my kid, don't tell me what to do, right?
Yeah, even with the other parents, I think my mom kind of accepted that I was taking care of her, and so I could kind of tell her what to do, and I was used to that to the point where I didn't even notice I was doing it. And I would try to talk to my dad about things. I'd try to, it wasn't good enough. So in my head, I was like, hey, when we sit down to eat, X, Y, and Z should be happening. And my dad turned it around on me and said, well, aren't you arrogant? And I didn't understand it at the time until I got older, why he would say something like that, because I didn't even know that what I was doing then was taking care of my mom, and he saw that I thought that I was doing more, and I had no idea that he would have even thought that.
Anybody else want to share? Yep.
I just want to say this because I wish someone has said that to me. When I was young, I always felt a lot of anger because I couldn't understand what was going on. For me, it was I cannot live a normal life. And it was this spiraling of anger and then guilt of being angry because, it's not my mom's fault. She didn't choose this. But I was so angry, and it wasn't until 3 years ago when I started therapy that someone actually said to me, you're right to be angry. You can be angry with this, it's okay. And it's still difficult to manage that guilt of being angry. But I just want to say to all of you that it's okay. It's okay.
Thank you. It is. I remember being growing up, right? And like now as an adult, I am like angry and feel guilty for being embarrassed of my mom, right? And there's a lot of emotions that go into, you know, the long-term care of, like, long-term effects of being a young caregiver, right? You know, relationships are a little bit different. You know, how you explore the world is differently. How you plan for life is differently. You know, I'm very independent. I don't need anybody, right? And it's impacted a lot of my relationships because of me being that sole provider, right?
I think caregiving has impacted the relationships I've been in because because I'm like patient and I was always that support and basically everything for like my parent with HD. It got to like points where like in romantic long-term relationships, I was like letting my partner walk all over me. And just like putting up with so many things just because I was used to, you know, like caregiving and stuff like that, and just like not like I was used to it. I wasn't I just would literally do everything for this person, and they never like could give that back because they never had to care for their parent when they were young. And it's just like it's all I knew though, like doing laundry and like literally just becoming like a maid basically. But I think that's part of me feels like it's okay and that I didn't get like taken advantage of being a good person, because I know that I like to care for people, and I know that I like to give physical care and do things for people, because that's just like what I've always did like as a caregiver.
And there's a lot of rewarding things about caregiving as well, right? But there's a lot of not great things about caregiving too. And I know we're almost out of time in 1 minute, and didn't get through a lot, but that's okay, because I think the most important part is people got to share. And in addition to that, just remember to give yourself grace. The most important thing out of any of these sessions is the connections you make, because what's gonna help you through all of this is connecting, finding that peer support, and realizing like, I'm not alone in this, right? And there is support outside of, you know, just that peer support. There's local organizations, there's national, there's international organizations that you can connect with, right? And it's really taking care of yourself through all of this and knowing like, it's not your fault, okay? Sorry we couldn't keep going, but does anybody have any questions?
I just want to add one more thing, because, you know, having HD in your family and like the decision to have children is weighing very heavily on many people, right? And not everyone has access to the science that it takes to make a baby that is free of the risk of HD, or there's still guilt associated with that, with like, if I'm going to get sick and have symptoms, should I even have a kid? I would not change anything about my life. I obviously want a world where my mom could have just been my mom. But my experiences have made me who I am, and have taught me a level of compassion that like I think would be impossible to learn elsewhere. And I was constantly investing in people and families that were not investing in me because I was so desperate for connection. And like when I found this community in my 20s, after thinking I was the only family in the world, it changed my life. And so I think my biggest thing for anyone, especially like being young caregivers, like, I'm sorry, life's it fucking sucks, right? You know, like it's just going to be like things are going to happen. But how lucky are we to have this world, to have these people that we can talk to who get it, who understand, who have resources, who have tools for us. And that as much as HD has taken from us, it has gifted us like this community, this family, this Ohana. So I just want to emphasize that I feel like it's okay to grow up in an HD family. It's okay if you're like, you know what? I mean, my sister, she couldn't afford IVF, so her and her husband said, HD shouldn't rob us of our right to have a family. And they have 3 beautiful kids, and, you know, they grew up with a mom that started having symptoms, but everyone has the right to have love, to have family, to enjoy life, and just be connected to these people, these organizations.
I think that's a good note to end on, right? Thank you all so much. Unless anybody has questions, then I'm here. But thank you all for coming, and happy to dive into any more conversations after.